Hello, BookTube. Mark at Book Time with Elvis and I have decided to read you a book. We are reading The Warden by Anthony Trollope. Slim little thing that is a delight to read. It's a delightful story. We're swapping off chapters. I have the even chapters, and we are up today to chapter 4. This is a story of a charitable hospital that was established in a will centuries ago in the town of Barchester. And over time, the land on which the charitable trust is situated has grown more and more valuable. The wealth of the charity of the hospital has grown, but not the tiny pittance handed over to each of the 12 men at the hospital. That rate was set centuries ago and has never been revisited, which means that as a result, the presenter of the charity is a wealthy man. He's raking in £800 a year while giving his beadsmen, the men in his hospital, a tiny amount every day, shillings every day. And a reformer, as we found out in the last chapter that I read, a reformer has come to Barchester, or has arisen in Barchester, to sort of make trouble about that, to say that it's not right, that anything that is inequitable is unjust, and all injustices should be righted. No matter how nice the man is who's in charge of the charity, in this case, not only nice, but the father of the woman that the young reformer loves. So we are moving on with the story today. I am trying to restrain myself from commentary because we've got prose to read, and Mark and I are not analyzing this book. We're simply reading it to you, but it's tough. It's tough. I love to analyze things, and I love to expound on them, but we are at chapter 4 now, which is entitled Hiram's Beadsmen. The hospital is called Hiram's Hospital. And we are at Hiram's Beadsmen. And as you can tell from the title, this chapter means that Trollope is going to give us our first intimate look at those beadsmen. We met the leader of them in the last chapter. But now we're going to get them. The action is going to be set in one room during one meeting of those beadsmen who are unlettered, ordinary folk. And I wanted to tell you that ahead of time so that you could prepare yourself, because often when Trollope writes unlettered, ordinary folk, it's extremely cringeworthy. It's excruciating. He never lost the faith all the way to the end of his life that he had a kind of an inherent simpatico with such people and could write them accurately. But we're gonna do the best we can, especially since even when Trollope is engaging in all kinds of condescension without realizing it, his insight into the human heart stays the same, and to human nature stays the same. So this is chapter 4. This is Hiram's Beadsmen. The parties most interested in the movement, which was about to set Barchester by the ears, were not the foremost to discuss the merit of the question, as is often the case. But when the bishop, the archdeacon, the warden, the steward, and Messrs. Cox and Cummins were all busy with the matter, each in his own way, it is not to be supposed that Hiram's beadsmen themselves were altogether passive spectators. Finney, the attorney, had been among them, asking sly questions and raising immoderate hopes, creating a party hostile to the warden, and establishing a corps in the enemy's camp, as he figuratively called it to himself. Poor old men! Whoever may be righted or wronged by this inquiry, they, at any rate, will assuredly be only injured. To them it can only be an unmixed evil. How can their lot be improved? All their wants are supplied, every comfort is administered, they have warm houses, good clothes, plentiful diet, and rest after a life of labor, and above all, that treasure so inestimable in declining years, a true and kind friend to listen to their sorrows, watch over their sickness, and administer comforts as regards this world the world to come, that comforter being the warden. This is an example where Trollope has a narrator floating over every book. This is an example where the narrator first tells us that the beadsmen themselves are, of course, involved in their own case, and then simply editorializes on it. And is this sarcasm or is this real? It seems to me that the narrator believes this, that no matter what happens, these men can only suffer by this becoming a big legal issue, big legal to-do. But I did say mere seconds ago that I would not comment, now didn't I? All right, so John Bold, that's the reformer, sometimes thinks of this when he is talking loudly of the rights of the beadsmen, whom he has taken under his protection. But he quiets the suggestion within his breast with the high-sounding name of justice. And here Trollope quotes a Latin tag that says, "Let justice be done, though the heavens fall." These old men should, by rights, have £100 a year instead of 1 shilling and sixpence a day, and the warden should have £200 or £300 instead of £800. What is unjust must be wrong, and what is wrong should be righted, and if he declined the task, who else would do it? As we mentioned, John Bold is a Twitter blue checkmark. He is, in other words, what my generation referred to as a busybody. Each one of you is clearly entitled to £100 a year by common law. Such had been the important whisper made by Finney into the ears of Abel Handy, and by him retailed to his 11 brethren. Too much must not be expected from the flesh and blood of even John Hiram's beadsmen, and the positive promise of 100 each to each of these old men had its way with most of them. The great Bunce, this is a large and very imposing beadsman who we met in the last chapter and who is the unofficial leader of the beadsmen, someone who has been invited by the warden to private talks at his house with wine by the fireside at night. The great Bunce was not to be wiled away, and was upheld in his orthodoxy by 2 adherents. Abel Handy, who was the leader of the aspirants after wealth, had, alas, a stronger following. No less than 5 of the 12 soon believed that his views were just making with their leader a moiety of the hospital. You might notice this is the 3rd time in this book that the word moiety has appeared. Trollope is... every time I read it, I think of The Princess Bride. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means, but that's okay. The other 3 volatile, unstable minds vacillated between the 2 chieftains, now led away by hope of gold, now anxious to propitiate the powers that still existed. It had been proposed to address a petition to the bishop as visitor, praying his lordship to see justice done in legal recipients of John Hiram's charity, and to send copies of this petition and the reply it would elicit to all the leading London papers, and thereby to obtain notoriety for the subject. This, it was thought, would pave the way for ulterior legal proceedings. It would have been a great thing to have had the signatures and marks of all 12 injured legatees, but this was impossible. Bunce would have sooner cut off his hand than signed it. It was then suggested by Finney that if even 11 could be induced to sanction the document, the one obstinate recusant might have been represented as unfit to judge on such a question, in fact being non compos mentis, not in his right mind, and the petition would have been taken as representing the feeling of the men. But this could not be done. Bunce's friends were as firm as himself, and as yet only 6 crosses adorned the document. Crosses meaning that these men can't write their own names. It was the more provoking, as Bunce himself could write his name legibly, and one of those 3 doubting souls had for years boasted of like power, and possessed indeed a Bible in which he was proud to show his name written by himself some 30 years ago, Job Sculpit. But it was thought that Job Sculpit, having forgotten his scholarship, and on that account recoiled from the petition, and that the other doubters would follow as he led them. A petition signed by half the hospital would have but poor effect. So they're trying to get a petition up, and they want as many people to sign it as possible. And Job Sculpit is hesitating to sign it, even though he has been bragging for years that he does, in fact, know how to sign his name. It was in Sculpit's room that the petition was now lying, waiting for such additional signatures as Abel Handy, by his eloquence, could obtain for it. The 6 marks it bore were duly attested thus, and the places were duly designated in pencil for those brethren who were now expected to join. For Sculpit alone was left a spot on which his genuine signature might be written in fair clerk-like style. Handy had brought in the document and spread it out on the small deal table, and was now standing by it, persuasive and eager. Moody had followed in with an inkhorn, carefully left behind by Finney, and Spriggs bore aloft, as though it were a sword, a well-worn ink-black pen, which from time to time he endeavored to thrust into Sculpit's unwilling hand. With the learned man were his 2 abettors in indecision, William Gazy and Jonathan Crumple. If ever the petition were to be forwarded, now was the time, so said Mr. Finney, and great was the anxiety on the part of those whose £100 a year, as they believed, mainly depended on the document in question. To be kept out of all that money, as the avaricious Moody had muttered to his friend Handy, by an old fool saying that he can write his own name like his betters, meaning Job Sculpit, Well, Job, said Handy, trying to impart his own sour, ill-omened visage a smile of approbation, in which he greatly failed. So you're now ready, Mr. Finney says. Here's the place, do you see? And he put his huge brown finger down on the dirty paper. Name or mark, it's all one. Come along, old boy. If so, we're to be spending this money, why, the sooner the better. That's my maxim. To be sure, said Moody, we aren't none of us so young. We can't stop waiting for old Catgut no longer. It was thus that these miscreants named our excellent friend, that is the warden, Mr. Harding. And the reason they call him Catgut is because he loves to give them informal musical recitations on his cello, which was strung with catgut. That is their nickname for him, Old Catgut. It was thus that these miscreants named our excellent friend, and the nickname he could easily have forgotten, but the allusion to the divine source of all his melodious joy would have irritated even him. Let us hope he never knew the insult. Only think, old Billy Gazy, said Spriggs, who rejoiced in greater youth than his brethren, but having fallen into a fire when drunk, had had one eye burnt out, one cheek burnt through, and one arm nearly burnt off, and who, therefore, in regard to personal appearance, was not the most prepossessing of men. A standard thing in Trollope, that a physical deformity of any kind means you're a bad guy. 100 a year, and all to spend. Only think, old Billy Gazy, and he gave him a hideous grin that showed off his misfortunes to their full extent. Old Billy Gazy was not alive to much enthusiasm. Even these golden prospects did not arouse him to do more than rub his poor old bleared eyes with the cuff of his beadsman's gown, and gently mutter, he didn't know. But you'd know, Jonathan, continued Spriggs, turning to the other friend of Sculpit's, who was sitting on a stool by the table, gazing vacantly at the petition. Jonathan Crumple was a meek, mild man, who had known better days. His means had been wasted by bad children, who had made his life wretched till he had been received into the hospital, of which he had not been long a member. Since that day he had known neither sorrow nor trouble, and this attempt to fill him with new hopes was indeed a cruelty. These men are not discontented. 100 a year is a nice thing for certain, neighbor Spriggs, said he. I once had nigh that myself, but it didn't do me no good. And he gave a low sigh as he thought of the children of his own loins who had robbed him. And shall have it again, Joe, said Handy, and with someone to keep it right and tight for you this time. Crumple sighed again. He had learned the impotency of worldly wealth, and would have been satisfied, if left untempted, to have remained happy with 1 and 6 a day. Come, Sculpit, repeated Handy, getting impatient. You're not going to go along with old Bunce in helping that parson to rob us all. Take the pen, man, and write yourself. Well, he added, seeing that Sculpit still doubted, to see a man is as afraid to stand by himself is to my thinking the meanest thing of all. Sink them all for parsons, says I, growled Moody, hungry beggars, as never thinks their bellies full, for they've robbed all and everything. Who's to harm you, man? Argued Spriggs. Let them look never so black at you, they can't put you out when you're once in. No, not old Catgut, with calves to help him. Calves, in other words, fancy legs, referring to the archdeacon, who we can assume occasionally puts on tight-fitting, nice clothes. Calves is their nickname for him. Catgut for the warden. Calves for the archdeacon. The narrator swiftly steps in. I am sorry to say the archdeacon himself was designated by this scurrilous allusion to his nether parts. 100 a year to win and nothing to lose, continued Handy. My eyes! Well, how's a man to doubt about such a bit of cheese as that passes me? But some men is timorous, some men is born with no pluck in them, some men is cowed at the very first sight of the gentleman's coat and waistcoat. Oh, Mr. Harding, if you had but taken the archdeacon's advice in that disputed case when Joe Mutters was this ungrateful demagogue's rival candidate. Afraid of a parson, growled Moody, with a look of ineffable scorn. I tell you what I'd be afraid of. I'd be afraid of not getting nothing from M but just what I could take with might and right. That's the most I'd be afraid of, any person of 'em all. But, said Sculpit, apologetically, Mr. Harding's not so bad. He did give us 2 a day, didn't he now? 2 a day, exclaimed Spriggs with scorn, opening awfully the red cavern of his lost eye. 2 a day, murmured Moody with a curse. Sink his 2 2 a day, exclaimed Handy. So all the ringleaders are outraged at being reminded that Mr. Harding is giving them an extra gift on top of the money that they get from the trust. 2 pence a day, exclaimed Handy, and I'm to go hat in hand to thank a chap for 2 pence a day when he owes me £100 a year? No, thank you. You may do for you, but it won't for me. Come, I say, Sculpet, are you going to put your mark on this here paper, or are you not? Sculpet looked round in wretched indecision at his two friends. What do you think, Billy Gazy? But Billy Gazy couldn't think. He made a noise like a bleating of an old sheep, which was intended to express the agony of his doubt, and again muttered that he didn't know. No. Take hold, you old cripple, said Handy, thrusting the pen into poor Billy's hand. There, so. Oh, there, you old fool. You've been smeared at all. There, that'll do for you. That's as good as the best name was ever written. And a big blotch of ink was presumed to represent Billy Gazy's acquiescence. Now, Jonathan, said Handy, turning to Crumple. 100 a year's a nice thing for certain, again argued Crumple. Well, neighbor Sculpet, how's it to be? Oh, please yourself, said Sculpet. Please yourself, and you'll please me. The pen was thrust into Crumple's hand, and a faint, wandering, meaningless sign was made, betokening such sanction and authority as Jonathan Crumple was able to convey. Come, Job, said Handy, softened by success. He's got 2 people to sign already. Don't let him have to say that old Bunce has a man like you under his thumb. A man that always holds his head in the hospital as high as Bunce himself, though you're never asked to drink wine and sneak and tell lies about your betters, as he does. Notice, they hold those evenings over wine with the Warden against Bunce. Sculpet held the pen and made little flourishes with it in the air, but still hesitated. And if you'll be said by me, continued Handy, you'll not write your name at all, but just put your mark like the others. A cloud began to clear from Sculpet's brow. See how canny Handy is? He knows that one of the reasons that Job Sculpet is hesitating is because he doesn't actually know how to write his own name. And there's a space laid open for it. He's afraid of being embarrassed. Handy tells him maybe a mark would be just as good. He's subtly playing on his psychology. And if you'll be said by me, continued Handy, you'll not write your name at all, but just put your mark like the others. We all know you can do it if you like, but maybe you wouldn't like to seem uppish, you know? Well, the mark would be best, said Sculpet. One name and all the rest marks wouldn't look well, would it? The worst in the world, said Handy. There, and stooping over the petition, he leaned clerk and made a huge cross on the left place of his signature. On the place left for his signature. That's the game, said Handy, triumphantly pocketing the petition. We're all in the boat now, that is, the 9 of us, and as for old Bunce and his cronies, they may... But as he was hobbling off to the door, with a crutch on one side and a stick on the other, he was met by Bunce himself. Well, Handy, and what may old Bunce do? Said the gray-haired, upright senior. Handy muttered something and was departing, but he was stopped in the doorway by the huge frame of the newcomer. You've been doing no good here, Abel Handy, said he. 'Tis plain to see that, and 'tisn't much good, I'm thinking, you ever do. I mind my own business, Mr. Bunce, muttered the other, and you do the same. Ain't nothing to you what I does, and your spying and poking here won't do no good yet, nor no harm. I suppose, then, Job, continued Bunce, not noticing his opponent, if the truth must out, you've stuck your name to that petition of theirs at last. Sculpet looked as though he were about to sink into nothing with shame. What is it to you what he signs, says Handy. I suppose if we all wanted to ax for our own, we needn't ax a leave of you first, Mr. Bunce, big man as you are, and as to your sneaking in here into Job's room when he's busy and you're not wanted. I've known Job Sculpet, man and boy, 60 years, said Bunce, looking at the man to whom he spoke. And that's ever since the day he was born. I knowed the mother that bore him, and when she and I were little wee things, picking daisies together in the close yonder, and I've lived under the same roof with him more nor 10 years, and after that I may come into his room without asking leave, and yet no sneaking neither. So you can, Mr. Bunce, said Sculpet. So you can, any hour, day or night. And I'm free also to tell him my mind, continued Bunce, looking at the one man and addressing the other. And I tell him now that he's done a foolish and a wrong thing. He's turned his back upon the one who is his best friend, and is playing the game of others who care nothing for him, whether he be rich or poor, well or ill, alive or dead. 100 a year? Are a lot of you so soft enough to think that if 100 a year to be given, it's to be the likes of you that will get it? And he politely pointed to Billy Gazy, Spriggs, and Crumple. Did any of us ever do anything worth half the money? Was it to make gentlemen of us that we were brought in here when all the world turned against us and we couldn't longer earn our daily bread? And you all's rich in your own way as he is in his? And the orator pointed to the side on which the warden lived. He's pointing in the direction of the warden. He's talking about the warden. Ain't you all getting all you hoped for? And I more than you hoped for? Wouldn't each of you have been given his dearest limb of his body to secure that which now makes you so unthankful? We want what John Hiram left us, said Handy. We want what's ourn by law. It don't matter what we expected. What's ourn by law should be ourn, and by goals we'll have it. Law, said Bunce, with all the scorn he knew how to command. Law! Did ye ever know a poor man yet was better for law or for a lawyer? Will Mr. Finney ever be good to you, Job, as that man has been? Will he see to you when you're sick and comfort you when you're wretched? Will he... And then Handy interrupts him. No, nor give you port wine, old boy, on cold winter nights. He won't do that, will he? Said Handy, and laughing at the severity of his own wit, he and his colleagues retired, carrying with them, however, the now powerful petition. There is no help for spilt milk, and Mr. Bunce could only retire to his own room, disgusted at the frailty of human nature. Job Sculpit scratched his head. Jonathan Crumple again remarked that for certain 100 a year was very nice, and Billy Gazy again rubbed his eyes and lowly muttered that he didn't know. And that is how the chapter ends. And you notice that the sentiment that was expressed at the very beginning of the chapter by the narrator, that did any good ever come to a poor man from a lawyer, that no matter who wins or loses from this whole tussle, the poor men, the beadsmen, will certainly lose. That sentiment is echoed explicitly by John Bunce at the end of the chapter, which kind of makes you think that the narrator was not being sarcastic and really did mean it. John Bunce is meant to be an entirely upright character, a little bit on the stern, commanding side, but entirely righteous. And there you have a little glimpse into the world of the beadsmen in chapter 4. It's a scene that's very small, it's very self-contained, takes place in Job Sculpit's room over the course of a few minutes, and is meant to do two things. It's meant to show us what the beadsmen are like, that they're not all one unit, that they aren't all under John Bunce's thumb, that they are rebellious, some of them, that they're mean-spirited, some of them, that some of them are just plain indecisive. It's meant to do that, and it's also meant to advance the plot just a bit, because now a new element has been added to this dispute in Barchester, and that is the petition. There's now a petition with 9 signatures out of 12 from men asking the bishop to intervene, asking the bishop to do justice in this case. So that's going to make life harder for everybody in the close. That's going to make life harder for the warden and for the archdeacon. And that is chapter 4. So we'll move on to, Mark will read chapter 5 to you. I do the even-numbered chapters. And we have more days in the month than we have chapters in the book. So there's no hard and fast schedule here. Mark may do his tomorrow, or he may not. I may skip a day. You never know. From time to time, I may skip a day. We'll still finish the book well in time to finish August. So that was chapter 4. I hope you're reading along. I hope you're enjoying it. This is a very accessible Trollope novel. And I will wrap this up for now. I will see you next time. Thank you, BookTube.